Welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking a profoundly mind-bending cosmic mystery. We're going to explore a story hidden right there in the ancient burning stars of the Orion constellation. The source material we're looking at today completely shatters our traditional sci-fi ideas of space exploration and first contact. It's a fascinating journey of discovery that's absolutely going to force us to question our exact place in the universe. Okay, let's dive right into this.
This is a book about forgetting we drew the lines, and about what happens when the lines look back. I love that quote. Because, you see, this story doesn't start with some massive alien spaceship suddenly hovering over a city, or a futuristic broadcast intercept. It starts with the deeply human act of just looking up at the night sky and drawing lines to make sense of the dark. We are quite literally wired to find patterns, to connect the dots of those distant fires. But the real shock happens when we realize that while we were so busy making shapes out of the stars, those stars might have actually been paying attention to us.
Which brings us to part one of our story, the myth of the hunter. Let's talk about drawing those lines.
Since the absolute dawn of humanity, we've looked at these burning spheres, separated by unimaginable, mind-boggling distances, and we pointed our arms up and drew the shape of a man, Orion the hunter. But what's really fascinating about a constellation is that it's not a physical object at all. Right? It is strictly an agreement between the human mind and the sky. In our source material, there's a mother named Mira who takes her 7-year-old daughter, Lena, up to the roof to teach her the stars. She points out Betelgeuse and Bellatrix, making up the hunter's shoulders, and then traces the stars of the belt and the sword. But Mira also teaches young Lena that the ancient myth of Orion the hunter actually comes with two very different interpretations.
And comparing these two myths is absolutely crucial to understanding what happens next. On one hand, we have the classic version. Orion arrogantly boasts he can hunt anything on Earth, and for his hubris, he gets punished by a tiny scorpion. Classic morality tale. But the second, deeper, and honestly more terrifying version suggests Orion isn't just boasting. He's actually completely accurate. He really is that incredibly competent. But his absolute competence becomes his biggest blind spot. He forgets that he exists inside the system rather than floating somewhere above it. In this version, the scorpion isn't a punishment. It's a cosmic correction of a category error. I want you to keep that raised arm and that violent cosmic correction in the back of your mind, because it is the absolute core of the mystery we're unraveling today.
Moving on to part two, the shape of absence, we're looking at a syntax of nothing. Let's shift gears from ancient myths to modern science. Specifically, we're heading to an isolated listening station on a Greek island called the Ionian Institute for Deep Field Research. For exactly 22 years, radio astronomer Dr. Emre Yildiz sat and watched the Orion Molecular Cloud Complex. Now, he wasn't looking for standard alien broadcasts. He wasn't waiting for a hello. He was looking for anomalous signal voids, basically pockets of electromagnetic silence that mathematically just shouldn't exist. He watched for 22 years, and to one completely ordinary morning, his monitors flashed an amber alert. The silence had finally spoken.
When his colleague, an astrophysicist named Jonah, reviewed this anomalous data, he realized they weren't looking at a traditional transmission at all. As Jonah perfectly states it says itself through what it withholds. They weren't receiving a deliberate message neatly encoded with prime numbers or geometry. No way. They were looking at the electromagnetic sound of a vast, ancient mind thinking.
So how exactly does a giant space cloud communicate? Well, the anomaly behaved almost like a shadow. The meaning lived entirely within deliberate, recurring gaps in the background radiation. It's a literal syntax of nothing. Imagine trying to decipher a language that isn't based on words at all, but purely on the strategic, timed pauses between words. They suddenly realized humanity wasn't being spoken to. Not at all. We were accidentally overhearing the cognition of a molecular cloud 30 light-years wide.
Which introduces a seriously mind-bending concept, the anti-signal. Information that is structured through strategic absence rather than transmitted content. This completely 100% shattered our protocols for first contact. Every SETI protocol we have assumes a discrete intelligence actively sending a directed beam toward us. But how on earth do you establish a protocol for overhearing a distributed intelligence that exists as a pattern in a giant cloud of gas and dust?
That brings us to part 3, Echoes Across Deep Time. Because as it turns out, Emre actually wasn't the first person to notice this cosmic anomaly. The secret behind these echoes boils down to a concept called resonance. The Institute's director, Adriana Voss, had secretly been tracking a 3-year buildup of this exact syntax. The cloud wasn't just randomly thinking in the void, it was actively altering its behavior in response to our observation.
Through sustained mutual attention, the cloud and humanity were slowly finding a shared frequency. Think about that for a second. It was becoming aware of us, simply because we were looking at it. When you map this out on a timeline, the sheer scale of it is staggering. 10 million years ago, the cloud forms. Fast forward all the way to 1962, and an astronomer named Papadimitriou writes a terrified letter saying he watched the cloud and thought he saw it watch back. Then 22 years ago, Emre starts watching. 3 years ago, Adriana starts tracking the resonance. And today, an archivist, who actually happens to be that same Lena who learned the stars from her mother, finds that 1962 letter and connects all the dots. The signal is curving into a question. This timeline proves that contact isn't some sudden, explosive Hollywood event. It is a slow, multi-generational process of mutual recognition.
Which leads us to Part 4, the cosmic mirror, the ultimate reflection of humanity.
On the 16th day of their intense round-the-clock study, the anti-signals shifted into something that felt grammatically distinct. The vast, silent cloud was asking Earth a question, and this completely flipped their paradigm upside down. For decades, we thought first contact would be a window. We'd look through the glass and see a distinct alien species waving right back at us. But this wasn't a window. It was a mirror. Remember, this cloud is over 1,300 light-years away. Whatever we are seeing now is just a reflection of human awareness from over a millennium ago, bouncing back at us through the electromagnetic structure of the cloud itself.
And that leads to maybe the most terrifying question of all. Can you receive the mirror without being destroyed by it? It's just like Orion looking at the sky, forgetting he's part of the system, and suddenly realizing his true position right before the scorpion strikes. The team at the Institute realized the profound danger, but also the breathtaking beauty of this ultimate cosmic test. Could humanity actually handle seeing itself from the outside?
To try and understand this, Adriana wrote a brilliant speculative rendering from the perspective of the cloud itself. She wrote, "You are asking yourselves the question. I am the mirror. See, the cloud doesn't have a human architecture for asking anything. It doesn't have vocal cords or a brain. The question that our scientists detected in the signal is actually just the shape of our own human presence, reflected back at us by an entity so massively ancient that it simply absorbs and returns our attention."
And finally, Part 5, an adequate witness. What is the ethical response to all of this? This brings us to the ultimate mind-bending dilemma. How exactly do you reply to a 10-million-year-old molecular cloud that has finally, after all this time, noticed us looking at it? We actually see two radically different approaches play out in the story. A global consortium of nations independently detects the signal, and their immediate reaction is to blast a math equation right back at it. Because, nothing says hello to an ancient nebula quite like unsolicited algebra. They act exactly like the arrogant hunter Orion, assuming they are outside the system, shooting an arrow into the dark. But the team at the Institute, and specifically Lena, choose humility. They choose to just sit, watch, and record. Lena goes up to the roof in the cold night just to look up and be a silent, receiving presence. Because they realized the profound ethical response wasn't a loud transmission, it was to become an adequate witness. An adequate witness is an entity whose presence alters what it observes, simply by being there, changing it and being changed by it, without any need to conquer, dominate, or shout over it. When Lena stands on that roof, looking at the distant reddish light of Betelgeuse, she is actively participating in a relationship that spans millions of years, just by paying attention. So, the next time you point your arm at the night sky to trace the belt and sword of Orion, think about this cosmic geometry. The stars in Orion are hundreds of light years apart from one another. They aren't actually connected in any physical way. The impossible distance between the stars isn't a flaw. It's the majestic nature of the cosmos. The hunter is real only from our specific perspective on this tiny blue planet. But here's where we are. Our perspective matters. Our attention literally shapes the field. Which leaves us with this final thought. We looked up into the dark, we drew the lines, we made up the myth of the hunter to feel less alone. But when the deepest, most ancient parts of the universe finally hold up a mirror to our existence, what will the stars see when they look back at you? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep looking up and stay curious.